Chinese EV manufacturer BYD has come within a whisker of toppling Japan's Toyota as Australia's best-selling car brand, with almost 19,000 vehicles sold last month. Meanwhile, premium Chinese brands such as Zeekr and XPeng are rapidly expanding their Australian presence. Tonight's foreign correspondent is taking a deep dive into the rise of EVs in China, where things are becoming so competitive, cars are packing some wild features, as China correspondent Alison Horne discovered.
You're about to see things you never even thought were possible. There's jumping cars, EVs in freezers, fridges in EVs, TVs in everything. And then there's this.
Does it fly yet?
Yeah, fly the sky.
Well, Alison Horne joins us now from Beijing. Alison, that car show looked pretty mind-blowing. You know, are we seriously going to be seeing flying cars by the year's end?
Yeah, it sounds pretty futuristic, doesn't it, Gemma, the idea of flying cars, but that gives you an idea of where China is looking into the future of the automotive industry. That flying car that I showed just then, fully electric, fully autonomous, which means no pilot, no driver as such. That's going to go on sale here in Beijing at the end of the year. Now, the regulations to match that to mean it'll be here in the skies of Beijing, that might still be a little bit further off, but that's the kind of technology China is pursuing as it looks to the future. And we've seen this over the last 20 years as China has really tried to propel itself to the forefront of the electric vehicle industry.
Now, the ABC's office has just reopened in Beijing after 5 years. How is that EV revolution changing China? What have you noticed there?
Yeah, I mean, I first came to Beijing in 2008 as a relatively young woman, and I remember back then I was really struck by how busy it was, but also the level of pollution. You'd walk outside most days and you'd kind of choke on it almost. You could taste it in your mouth. Coming back here almost 20 years later, there's a remarkable difference. For example, the sky is so much clearer. I know it doesn't look like it right now. That is actually just fog. It's not pollution. But on most days, the sky's pretty clear. You don't really see that veil of pollution, and you certainly don't taste it in your mouth. And that's one of the main results of building what is not just an EV society, but an electric society, where so many of the cars and forms of transportation here are EVs, not just cars, but electric bikes and scooters and electric buses and potentially electric flying cars in the future. And this was a plan of China that didn't just happen overnight. As far back as 2001, the Chinese government set out to make itself the world leader in EVs. It determined that EVs were going to be the future. It didn't dominate in the oil or gas industry, and it didn't want to be reliant on oil or gas anymore, so it looked to building a new sector. And now it controls the entire supply chain from conception through to export, and it's done that through pumping about $230 billion, $230 billion into starting new car companies, to partnering and investing in others, to building the tech and the research and development, and also the infrastructure that's needed. Charging infrastructure, for example. China now has the largest charging network across the world. One charger for every 10 cars, for example, compared to Australia that has one charger for every 45 EVs, for example. And so you see that kind of level of tech and development here, where you can have a charger that replenishes an EV battery from 10 to 70% in just the space of 5 minutes, for example. I even went in a car during this foreign documentary program where you drive into what could almost be described as a petrol station for EV batteries. You drive the car in, or it drives itself in, and you just take your hands off the wheel while a little robot reaches up and pulls the battery out and pops in a freshly charged one. The other battery is taken away to be recharged. The process took 4 minutes, quicker than I think I've filled up a petrol car in some times. That's how China has tried to build this entire industry to make it a success here.
Now, Alison, China now provides 75% of the global EV market. Most of the world's car companies, that includes European manufacturers, they're now working with the Chinese on their development. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so when I've been going around China and particularly going into EV manufacturing facilities, it really hammers home just how advanced China's tech is in trying to build these cars. In one of the factories I went into, they were pumping a car off their production line every single minute. It was all automated. There was barely a human in sight. Robots were carrying the car frames around and between stations where other robots were sort of piecing the car together. And that means that China has been able to not only develop these cars, but build them in ways that have just never been achieved in other parts of the world. And that's why we're seeing increasingly car companies across the world, including legacy car brands, recognising that they need to be engaged with China in some sort of capacity to keep themselves competitive. So Renault, for example, the European car brand, it doesn't even sell cars here in China, but it has set up a research lab in Shanghai to try to get that high-tech knowledge that they feel they can only get in China. And as a result, they're now producing their cars 3 times quicker than previous.
Alison, one of the concerns people have in the West about Chinese EVs is who can access the data on that. What's the feeling about this from Westerners who are working with the Chinese?
Yeah, China's EV industry does have some major concerns, and we've seen it coming from Australia, for example, and the United States, these concerns about data, whether or not that can be accessed by China. Experts that I've spoken with here say that that part of the story is kind of overblown, and they say that the EV industry is here now at such a competitive rate that you really can't disengage from being involved with China. You need to stay engaged, but set some pretty firm guidelines on allowing China in.